All right, let's dive into the story of First Samuel. It's an inspiring narrative about faith, leadership, and humility, and also, of course, trusting in God's plan. So, this book has so many lessons for everyday's life and full of interesting characters, events that remind us of the importance of staying close to God, basically. Let's go ahead. From 1 to 3 chapters, the birth and calling of Samuel. So it all starts with a woman called Hannah who desperately wants a child but hasn't been able to have one. She prays fervently to God, promising to dedicate her child to him if he answers her prayer. And God does. God does answer her prayer. Hannah gives birth to Samuel, and she keeps her promise, bringing him to live at the temple under the care of the priest Eli. Samuel grows up in God's presence, and one night God calls him directly. Although he is young, Samuel learns to listen and respond to God's call. This shows us the importance of being attentive to God's voice even at a young age. So the famous Samuel, here I am, Lord, your servant is listening. That attitude should be there. As we move on, basically that message is about the destruction of the house of Eli, especially his two sons. Now moving on, 4 through 7 chapters, we see the Ark of Covenant being captured, and it was written. So Israelites go to battle against Philistines, bringing the Ark of Covenant along, as if it is some magical charm. But they lose. It's not like keeping the Bible under the pillow and you will not have nightmares. Of course, to an extent, yes, but it doesn't work all the time, especially when you have sin in your lives. Here also they lose, and the Philistines capture the ark. However, God shows He's powerful even without Israel's help. God sends plagues on the Philistines until they finally return the ark themselves. So through this, we see that God's presence is holy and powerful. He is not a good luck charm or some precious stone, but a sovereign God to be honored and obeyed. So that's the most important thing. Now, as we move on, 8th to 10th chapters talk about Israel's demanding a king, and Saul is chosen. A slow uproar is coming. Looking at the nations around, people around, they also wanted a king for themselves. So they went. A lot of warnings were given from Samuel, but despite all of that, they were kind of constantly nagging Samuel, we want a king, we want a king, because they are tired or tired of being led by these judges and prophets. They want a king to lead them into battle. um, and God warns them about the challenges of having a king, but grants their request. Samuel anoints Saul as king, a man who looks tall, strong. He's from a rich background also. um, Here God teaches us that even when we insist on our own plans, he's patient and still willing to guide us. So now, if you look at the life of Saul, he's a very humble person. He's a bit shy also, and he did not act, uh, without patience. He waited those who especially mocked against him. This fellow will become king, but still he chose not to harm them. Rather, that's a day of celebration, being grateful to the Lord who granted them the victory. So he started very well. It's a very uh, zealous king for the Lord. And as we move on, we see 11 to 15, his early success and first failures. Saul starts strong, leading Israel to victory against their enemies. But soon, his impatience and disobedience start to show up. When Samuel delays in arriving for sacrifice, Saul takes matters into his own hands, performing it himself, which basically displeases God. He does a foolish thing of rash vow also, In the middle of the battle, he wanted his soldiers to starve, which only caused them to sin by eating the blood. Later, God commands Saul to completely destroy the Amalekites, but he spares their king Agag and the best livestock. So this disobedience costs him dearly. Samuel tells Saul that God values obedience more than sacrifice. Here we learn that doing things our way instead of following God's commands can lead us to our downfall. And moving on, 16th to 17th chapter, now David comes into the picture. David is anointed from being a shepherd boy, and he fights Goliath, the famous story. God sends Samuel to anoint a king, new king, young shepherd named David. He doesn't look like a king. He's young, not as imposing as Saul. But God sees his heart. Later, when Israel faces the Philistine giant Goliath, David steps up in faith. He's confident, not because of his own strength, but because he trusts God. God, David's courage and reliance on God to face seemingly impossible challenges are powerful examples for us to today. We see a lot of giants in front of us, but are we taking them to the Lord in prayer? Moving on, 18 to 20 the chapters, David and Saul's growing tensions. Now, David becomes a hero after defeating Goliath, but Saul grows jealous of his popularity. Despite Saul's attempts to harm him, David stays loyal, even becoming best friends with Saul's son Jonathan. Jonathan helps David escape Saul's wrath, showing the value of true friendship and loyalty. David's refusal to retaliate against Saul reflects his deep respect for God's anointed leader, and even when that leader is flawed. Now, moving on, 21 to 24, we see David on the run and sparing Saul's life. David spends his years fleeing from Saul. During this time, he gathers a group of followers and shows remarkable restraint. Twice, David has the chance to kill Saul, but refuses, saying he won't harm the Lord's anointed. David's mercy towards Saul demonstrates his humility, patience, and respect for God's timing. So, he trusts that God will take care of him and fulfill his promises, even if it takes time. So, again, David, we see him as the one who is waiting upon the Lord for his timing. 25 to 27 chapter talks about David's encounter with Nabal and the Philistines. So David meets Abigail, a wise and courageous woman who stops him from taking revenge on her foolish husband Nabal. That name says fool. Nabal means fool. She brings peace, showing how godly wisdom can prevent needless conflicts. After Nabal dies, David marries Abigail. Meanwhile, David spends some time living among the Philistines, even though he is the future king of Israel. So this period shows that God often prepares us in unexpected ways and places. Now we see the downfall and David's rise, downfall of Saul and David's rise in 28, 29, 30, 31 chapters of First Samuel. As Saul's end draws near, he's desperate and turns to a medium for guidance. You remember we read it. You should never turn to a medium. Now it shows how far he has fallen from trusting God. In contrast, David continues to grow as a leader. Eventually, Saul dies in battle along with his son Jonathan. It's a tragic ending for Saul, who once had so much potential but couldn't let go of his own pride and fear. David mourns genuinely for Saul and his son Jonathan, showing his deep respect and love, even for those who opposed him. So, throughout First Samuel, we see themes of trust, humility, the dangers of pride and jealousy. David's life offers an example of faith and integrity, even in difficult times. Saul's story reminds us that rejecting God's guidance leads to downfall, and Samuel's steady dedication reminds us of the power of prayer, obedience, and hearing God's voice. So, this book also shows us that God doesn't choose leaders based on appearance or social status. He looks at the heart. The book inspires us to seek God's will, value humility, and stay close to God's promises no matter the circumstances. God bless you.